Thanks. Good afternoon. Welcome to Senate Education. We have a number of things to get through today. Several walkthroughs, some overviews from the House, some of their work having to do with a range of things: school construction, universal school meals, and our own and the House Miscellaneous Education Bill. But we're starting with Mike O'Grady, who drafted H486. And this is an act relating to school construction. We will hear from Representative Brady at 2:45, but we've got Ledge Council available for a few minutes right now. The bill is in your folder. So let's just go through 483. Senators will recall we passed the school construction bill out. 486, thank you. And I don't have theirs. And that is in the Appropriations Committee, and it will end up likely in the budget. But this is the House version. So, Mr. O'Grady, thanks for joining us in the same room you always see me in, but a different topic.
Different seat, too. Would you like me to put the bill on the screen?
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay, can you see the screen?
Yeah, and Senator Gulick is now here. So we're
okay.
This is school construction.
Oh.
Well, this is Mike O'Grady with Legislative Council. As the chair just referenced, your committee passed out S124. It's in Senate Appropriations Committee. The first section of H486 is very similar to S124 and was based on S124. There are some differences. As with S124, it created the task force to examine, evaluate, and report on issues relating to school construction. It set up a committee with significant stakeholder membership. One of the differences between S124 and 486 is in the membership of legislators. The House added 2 current members of the House and 2 current members of the Senate. The concept there is that there might be a House member that's an expert on education policy and another that's an expert on education finance, similar to the Senate. And so that's why 2 members from the legislature were added. The rest of the membership of this task force is the same as what was in 124, except for the last member, the state toxicologist from the Department of Health. She was added because the powers and duties of the task force remain the same, except for 4 and 5 of the powers and duties on page 3, lines 3 through 6. In addition to looking at the needs, program, health and safety of statewide construction, funding options, the governance structure, etc., the provisions that were in S124, H486 also directs the task force to look at the appropriate state action level for response to polychlorinated biphenyl contamination in a school, and whether the state should continue to require testing of indoor air quality in schools for polychlorinated biphenyls. The assistance language is a little bit different. The Office of the Treasurer came in, well, actually, no, I'm not sure if it was in 124, but on lines 14 and 15, instead of just having the authority to contract for school construction expert, the Office of the State Treasurer asked for authority to contract for any administrative, technical, financial, or legal assistance required by the task force. And then in the report requirement, you see that the the report comes back to you as it did with 124 with findings and any recommendations for legislative action, including a recommendation how the state should expend the funding in the education fund reserved for future school construction. And I'll talk about that, the reserve and the education fund in a second. Then the rest of this is pretty technical. Who calls the first meeting, how many meetings, compensation, all the same as what was in 124. The appropriation amount is the same. But as with the assistance section, the state treasurer asked for the appropriation language to reference the ability to retain any administrative, technical, financial, legal, or construction expert required by the task force. So that is section 1, very similar to 124, except for the extra member of the House, extra member of the Senate, the inclusion of the state toxicologist on the task force, the duties of the task force to look at the state action level for PCB testing and to evaluate the appropriateness of testing indoor air quality for PCBs, and then some minor technical amendments to the assistance authority for the state treasurer. So I'll stop there and see if anyone has any questions.
I think so. Oh, sorry, Senator.
I have a question. For the, on page 1, lines 9 through 11, or 9 through 12, I'm not seeing it anywhere, but is there any sort of requirement that the representatives and the senators be from different districts?
No, that was not in there. There was a discussion about whether or not there should be specifying language, but ultimately the House said the speaker and the committee on committees will be able to figure that out in their discretion.
Any other questions on section 1? I think the only thing, can you just point me to the page? I know you mentioned it. It sounds like the House wants to ask the question about whether or not PCB testing should happen using air monitoring or whatever that is.
Yep, on page 3, lines 3 through 6.
Great.
First, what the appropriate state action level for response to PCB contamination would be, and whether the state should continue to require the testing of indoor air quality in schools for PCBs, because that's currently what is being tested for PCBs. It's the indoor air quality of schools. And then once it's detected in the air, then they investigate the source. Once they investigate the source, then they develop a remediation plan.
Thank you. Section 2.
Section 2. Section 2 was not in 124. It is new to your review. It would, it's called the testing pause section. It would pause testing of indoor air quality in schools for PCBs. And the first subsection says, notwithstanding the requirements and authority under 2021 Action Resolves number 74, which is where PCB testing was required for indoor air quality in schools. The agency shall not initiate testing for PCBs at any school in the state after the effective date of the act until the report of the school construction aid task force required by section 1 has been submitted by the General Assembly and the General Assembly approves further testing for PCBs in school. So it's not just a pause until the report of the task force is submitted. There has to be a further legislative action to require further PCB testing.
Senator Weeks.
But
just one question. So will we be hearing from the Association of Superintendents and Principals?
Yeah, and we're going to hear again from, I would think, Dr. Levine, who just approved as well.
Thank you.
And we have the sponsor of the bill coming in today.
So if A&R has initiated on-site testing, which I'm sure you're aware that they have, in a school prior to the effective date of the act, the agency shall complete the testing. So that's on-site testing. So they literally have the monitoring equipment in the school. And if that testing was initiated prior to the effective date, and it indicates the need for remediation or removal of PCBs in the school may seek a grant under subsection C of the section for the cost of remediation. And I'll talk about that grant program under subsection C in 1 minute. If A&R has only approved a work plan or cost estimate to conduct an inventory or testing, but no on-site testing has been conducted, A&R shall not conduct on-site testing at that school under the authority set forth in the subdivision. So only if there's on-site testing ongoing prior to the effective date of this act shall A&R finish the testing in that school. And then in subdivision 3,
Question here from Senator Williams.
Any indication why they put that in there?
why they put in that the
To
testing
start testing. And to not go ahead with the plan.
So I think it's the larger issue of why pause the PCB testing as a whole. The House Ed Committee received significant testimony from several schools and education associations like the principals, the supervisors, et cetera, about how the current requirement to test for PCBs can actually impede planning for future school construction, and that they want to be able to basically plan and intermesh PCB testing with future school construction planning. For example, if you're doing PCB testing and say it comes back that a room that kids sometimes use but sometimes not exceeds the action level, and it exceeds even the EPA mandatory response action level, you may have to knock that room down. And maybe you have been planning in 2 to 3 years to knock that room down anyway, but to build out from that. But you don't have the money right now to build out from that. It's kind of what they were calling a hand grenade in your school construction plan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So in 2021, the General Assembly approved $4.5 million for A&R to conduct the testing of indoor air quality for schools. They have used a substantial amount of that, but any money that they have left over at the end of fiscal year 23, when testing should pause, reverts to the education fund to be held in reserve for future school construction needs as recommended by the School Construction Task Force. Remember how in section 1, there was a reference to the money held in reserve. Well, this money is going to be held in reserve as well. And then to address the fact that A&R has contracted with consultants to do the testing, and states aren't supposed to impede contracts. Under the US Constitution, states are not supposed to impede contracts except when allowable. But one of the terms and conditions of pretty much every state contract is a provision that's required under Administrative Bulletin 3.5 that says at the end of any fiscal year, if appropriations are not provided for the ongoing contracted services, then that state agency can terminate the contract. Well, what you've done in section subdivisions 1, 2, and 3 of section 2 of this is that you've said that there will no longer be appropriations available to A&R in fiscal year 24 for testing. So A&R is then directed to terminate the contract with the consultant under what's called the non-appropriations clause in that contract. So you're not creating a contracts clause issue under the U.S. Constitution, because a term and condition of the contract is this non-appropriations clause. And then moving on to subsection B, in 2022, in Act number 178, the yield bill, there was $32.5 million that were set aside in the education fund for purposes of investigation, remediation, and removal of PCBs from schools. Basically, money to respond and to provide assistance to schools when there was a need for remediation or removal of PCB materials. So that money that was reserved under Act 178 is unreserved in subsection B. So it's no longer just there for PCB testing. Similarly, there was 2.5 million of that 32.5 that had been appropriated to the emergency board for exigent needs for PCB response and remediation. That is also, whatever unexpended portion of that is brought back into the ed fund for further allocation. So basically, you're bringing whatever is unexpended from that 32.5 million back into the ed fund, unreserving it, and then allowing for its future allocation. And then subsection C, this is the grant program that will be created at the Agency of Education for those schools where testing is ongoing, on-site testing is ongoing, and they discover that they have to do response or remediation or removal. It's also there for those schools that have already received a grant from the Agency of Natural Resources for remediation or removal, but did not receive 100% of the cost. And then it's the third category of eligible entities under this grant program will be the Burlington School District for Burlington High School. So subdivision C1, notwithstanding 16 VSA 4025D, which is a crazy provision in the Ed Fund chapter that says if the Ed Fund is ever used for a purpose other than one of the specified purposes, then the property tax, all education property tax, is repealed. So you don't want to do that. So you notwithstand 16 VSA 4025, and you provide that the 29.5 and the unexpended funds from the emergency board shall be appropriated from the Ed Fund to the Agency of Education in fiscal year 2024 for one of the following purposes. First, it's grants to schools in the state that are required after A&R testing to conduct remediation or removal. So those schools that are doing the testing, on-site testing right now, the grant shall be in the amount sufficient to pay for 100% of the school's remediation or removal costs, including costs incurred when necessary to relocate students to a facility during remediation or removal. The second subdivision is similar, but it's grants to those schools that have already conducted remediation or removal and only received 80% of the cost of the remediation or removal from A&R to make them equitable in the grant with schools under sub A. The grants shall be in an amount to reimburse the school for any remediation or removal costs not paid by A&R. And then last, there will be a grant of up to $16 million to the Burlington School District to reimburse the district for the cost of demolition and removal of PCB contamination at the high school. So I'm going to stop there and see if you have any questions.
Was there a fiscal note that went along with this bill?
Yes, there was. And Julia Richter from JFO is very plugged in to the Ed Fund and this bill. you should probably have her in to testify on the fiscal implication.
Any other questions from Mr. O'Grady on this?
I've got one last provision I want to note.
Let's see if there's anything right now. Everybody good? Okay.
So in order for there to be cost containment on the grant program, the Secretary of Ed, after consultation with interested parties like the school boards, the superintendents, school custodians, shall develop criteria for the cost of remediation and removal of PCB contamination that will be eligible. So the grant isn't a blank check for a school to put in like the 4-pane Scandinavian windows with, there's going to be eligible cost, and the schools are going to have to work within that for the purposes of their grants and or reimbursements. And then the act would take effect on passage. That's probably necessary in order to deal with the ongoing testing that A&R is implementing under the prior appropriation.
So, Brady, do you know if A&R testified before House Ed on this? We're going to have this.
I think I know they had a couple of people in. Can't remember exactly who it was. It was probably Trish Cipollino, who is administering the testing program at A&R. But I do know from the witness list that there were people from DEC on the witness list.
Okay. Thank you.
I think maybe a question for you, Chair, or it might be for Mike, I'm not sure. The page 7, line 17 through 19, the 16 million to Burlington School District, is that in line with that 80-20 rule for PCB testing?
No, it is not. It is more in line with 100%. The Burlington School District came forward with cost estimates, and one of them was the up to $16 million for the demolition and removal. And so if you're going to be paying 100% of remediation and removal for the other schools, the concept is you should be paying 100% for the demolition and removal at Burlington School District, especially since that was in part triggered by a lower school action level at that time.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted, if we're doing, I know Burlington was the hardest hit, and I'm glad we're going to be able to help them. I also just want to make sure that we'll also be able to do 100% for all the schools in other districts as well.
Yeah, and that I think is part of the conversation of what it's going to cost for school construction and how you do it and what you do. The House Education Committee had a presentation from Rhode Island about how they went about doing it, how they did cost share.
Saw that.
Sorry?
We saw that as well. Thank you.
Okay.
Senator Weeks and Senator Dewitt.
Yeah, so it's a good summary. I like it, but I have a process question.
Yeah.
So the Senate bill goes towards the House. The House bill obviously arrives here. In the end,
We put theirs right in the budget. Our Senate bill, which had the $200,000 in that first part, went right in the budget.
Okay.
It's no longer a standalone bill.
Not longer standalone. So that will help us maybe in some of our negotiations, but it may not, because it would depend on the Senate's position on the pause. And if people want to postpone PCBs, then we could move this. If this still is a standalone, we'll take a vote on it. No matter what, it'll end up in appropriations because it has money in it. But Senator Kitchell asked that we put ours in the budget, guarantees that it gets started, and it's the only must-pass bill. So if there was any, I think she foresaw perhaps a conflict and one that couldn't be resolved at the end around the pause. If they really want that pause, the Senate, if the Senate doesn't, the bill died. The bill died. It's in the budget now. The only must-pass bill that we pass every year. So at least that 200,000 in the study group would get going. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the central question for the PCB testing is, why And Mike actually touched on it earlier, but I just want to reiterate that, why would we do testing if the building is going to be demolished for future construction? Because that testing is pricey. And I mean, I think I've mentioned this a few times. I do want to make sure that PCB testing that does happen informs the construction process so that things aren't being, so that in order to minimize waste of money, right?
Yeah, I agree. I really do. I think the question also is one of, I may be wrong here, but if, depending on how much money we have for construction, there could be a building sitting there for 10 more years before it's renovated or does anything. Should the parents know that PCBs are in that building? Just another kind of piece of it.
And that turns or is dependent on the school construction bill, the analysis that happens from it. So we don't know until that analysis happens, right?
No, I mean, it depends on really, I think, the local decisions around whether or not they're going to want to renovate their building or start a new building no matter what. I think some of it will be contingent upon whether or not we can find a funding source to help them. In other words, if all of a sudden there's a district that really wants to do it just because their building is really bad, if the state comes up with the money to a matching grant or something like that, it might incentivize them more to renovate or to open a new building. So I see it as a bunch of sort of things coming together, I think, maybe at the same time. Center Weeks.
Yeah, just the thought of how do you prioritize if you don't know. This is one condition of a school that's unknown for those that are not tested. How do you prioritize? And given that this school construction, this will be a 20-year deal. This won't be, 1 year, 5 years, whatever it's fixed. It's a long-term bill.
We do have to find, I think, a funding source. When we cleaned up Lake Champlain, we did the property transfer tax, or as we're doing. I think we're gonna have to find something else to help school districts so they can do it. Senator Cook.
I didn't write this bill, so I'm just speaking from my point of view, which is that another complexity and with this with the PCB testing, from what I've been seeing, is not just the way it's going to play with the construction bill and the construction work, but also as it exists right now. Great intentions, but there's not a super robust system in place to deal with situations when there are PCBs found. And we're hearing about situations right now in a system that's already stressed in terms of resources and finances. So you've discovered this. Now what do you do? And I think part of the pause would also just be to maybe put a more robust program / system in place so that you don't incite panic and fear in a situation where you can't really, then what do you do? Like, it just doesn't, if you had an easy resolve, it might be really positive, but the way it is right now, I think it's causing problems and it's extremely costly.
Well, we did hear from Dr. Levine that they felt like they had one bumpy road. They feel like it's smoothed out now. They're ready to continue. But I would agree, they did admit to having that one situation, but they feel as though they've learned from that. I mean, you were here for his testimony or
I
not?
was, we might want to hear testimony from folks that are dealing with a new situation that's happening.
Which
in
is
real
where?
time, I think in Twin Valley. So that's
Yeah.
happening right now.
Senator
So
Williams?
just a question
Yeah.
about once again, well date on the testing?
What date?
What date was the testing supposed to be concluded?
Uh,
Yeah.
It was originally 2024 and then 2025. And that's in 709 from 2021. I'm sorry, Act 74, Section E 709.1 from 2021. And that actually brings up a good point. If you're going to go forward with a pause, you might want to be very clear that schools don't have to meet that 2025 date. I don't know how they would because there's no money for testing. A&R is directed not to test, but that might be a technical amendment to add to the pause section.
Right, so I think we'll leave this conversation here for now, and we'll have some more testimony, of course. And we will shift to S-132, where Senator Jewett has a bill. Are you gonna stay for it? Oh, you're gonna go down there? Oh, sure, good.
I can
Yeah,
stay
please.
here.
Yeah, no, please go right down. Please go down. And then Ledge Council, you're here as well. And this is an act relating to nominating petitions for a candidate for the office of a unified school district board member. And this might be something you'd want to put into miscellaneous items
I would like to put this in the miscellaneous. tab.
for the record.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, friends and colleagues here in Senate Education. This was an issue that was brought to my attention by a friend and colleague of mine who is not necessarily a direct constituent, but it's something that has come up. It's basically a technical fix, just so you know. So there's nothing super compelling or exciting about this, but it is something that should be, fairly, I shouldn't use the word simple apparently to
Never.
fix. So I'll just go through it with you. Do you all have?
Yeah, we have it in our book.
Last year, the General Assembly passed Act 176. This was in 2022, which rewrote Chapter 11 of 16 VSA, Union School District.
400-page bill. 400 page?
Just shy of 200.
Just shy of 200. All right. I remember that's being a lot bigger.
It's big.
It's big.
Here's the issue. While updating sections 711 and 730, including adding the modified at-large model, some inconsistencies were created. Prior to Act 176, the number of petition signatures needed was the lesser of 1% or registered voters, or 30. After Act 176, the number of petition signatures needed for the proportional model remained at the lesser of 1% or 30. But the modified at-large in the at-large models, they were set at 60. So in a tiny little town, you've got to get 60 signatures to be on the ballot for school board, and I can tell you that in Burlington, it's 50. We're the biggest city in the state, so.
Is that sent by Burlington?
No, I think it's.
Except by all of us.
Yeah.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
So this change meant that, for example, in Dover, for the first time, instead of 14 signatures, 60 were required. Okay, you guys are following me?
Yeah.
It now took more signatures to get on the ballot for the school board than for state representatives. This created a situation where people in districts that weren't using proportional model were now required to get twice or more the number of signatures as those in much larger districts. And there's a little visual here for comparison.
Do we have the visual? Do we have some?
Oh,
I think we do. We have those.
if not, I can pass this around
Okay.
after, but it just shows you the amount of signatures that are needed.
Okay, great.
Dependent on population, et cetera. And then you've got the specific state statute. Basically, I'll jump to how to fix, which is S-132, this bill, sets the relevant proportions of section 711 and section 730 to require the lesser of 1% or 30 for all school boards across the state.
And Senator Gould, was that what it was before we did our work last year? Are we just sort of going back and correcting it?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
As it was prior to the enactment of Act 176 in 2022. And the reasons to do this: consistency across the state and school districts, consistency throughout the statute section of section 730, consistency across different statute sections, 711 and 730, fairness and equity, and we want greater participation in our democracy. Adding new barriers to doing this seems counterproductive. Any questions?
Any questions for Senator Gould at this point, besides a motion to table it for? So So we'll have the council, do you mind joining us? And thank you, Senator Julick.
Very welcome.
So I guess what would probably be most helpful first is to understand what Senator Gulick said was prior to, is it 174?
176.
176. Are we kind of returning to a pre-176? Is that what we're trying to fix here? Oh, thanks.
Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel. So if you're Senator Campion is the only one who had to suffer through
This joy.
what became Act 176 last year, which was a rewrite of the entire Chapter 11 in Title 16, which is the governance chapter for union school districts. And that chapter hadn't, I'm just giving a little, is it okay if I just give a little
Please,
background?
yeah.
It'll help with my answer, which is going to be wishy-washy. That chapter hadn't really been updated in decades. And so you had a school governance system that was going from some union school districts to, we had Act 46, right? And that involved a lot of mergers of school districts to more union school districts. And so the governance statutes and processes left a lot on the table for districts to figure out for themselves in certain situations. And so Chapter 11 now, current law, is much more specific than what was in Chapter 11 prior to Act 176. And one of the pieces that is addressed here is representation models on school boards in union school districts. And so the US Constitution requires in certain situations, including on school district boards, one vote, everyone gets a vote. So there needs to be appropriate representation on that school district, and that's reflected in where nominees are coming from and who they are deemed to represent. So there's actually 3 different models that are allowable. One of the models is this hybrid model, and that came out of case law that was not really reflected in Chapter 11 as it stood before Act 176. All that to say, some of what you're doing here some of what S132 proposes to do here may put the law back into what folks were experiencing, but it may not have been explicitly spelled out in Chapter 11 prior to Act 176. So it's not a yes, this is exactly what was in Chapter 11 prior to Act 176, but it may be what some union school districts were experiencing prior to Act 176 being as specific as it is. So what S132 does is it amends only certain, so if you remember back to the very beginning of the session, we talked about different types of school districts. So you have town school districts like Burlington, you have incorporated school districts, which were formed by a charter at some point in time. There are still some that exist. And then there's the union school districts. And there's 2 different types of union school districts. There's unified union school districts, where all of the member school districts kind of give up their school districtness and become one school district. And then there's union, and they are formed for K through 12 or pre-K through 12. And then there's also elementary and high school union school districts. So those would have member school districts who send their kids to this either union elementary that's organized for elementary school or union high school that's organized to provide education for the high school grades. This bill only proposes to update the unified union sections. It relieves unchanged the union elementary and union high school sections, which do have the same representation requirements and petition requirements. So S-132 is only updating the unified union school districts. So there would be, if this were to pass, there would be a difference between the representation, the signatures required under different representation models for unified union school districts versus union elementary or union high school districts.
So may I just ask this, the sponsor, is that something? Because somebody came to you with that question,
Yeah.
like with this request, what
Right.
happens? Yeah, so are you averse to us bringing the others into the fold?
I was
Sounds like-
not averse, and I was
Okay.
actually going to ask Ms. St. James if that's something that she would recommend. I don't know if she can.
That's a policy decision. I just wanted to highlight that this is only addressing unified union school districts.
Okay.
So if you were to look at chapter 11 now or pull up
Yeah.
Act 176, you're going to see other places where you see 60 voters are required to
Yeah.
get on a petition.
Mhm.
And some of those will remain unchanged under this bill, and that's because those sections would be addressing union elementary or union high school districts.
So you're open, I mean, you're not,
I'm okay.
you're open
Yeah,
to,
it seems to make sense.
yeah, because otherwise it could get confusing out there. I
Yeah.
would think you get 60, you get 15, depending on where. Are you willing to share with us the person that asked you to put this forward? Should we have that person in to help us give a,
We could, sure, I can
Town?
ask.
okay,
Yeah.
okay, might just be helpful as we
Yeah.
dig into it
Exactly.
in a weeks.
No,
No,
We can probably blame Terrazini.
So,
now that bill
He's
was,
existing.
the best part of that bill was my floor report, because do you remember?
No, I don't.
The
I blocked it all out.
The description, I left out like maybe 3 to 7 sections of this 200-page bill in my description. And at that point, mid-May, nobody, all in favor, aye. They were just, even Mazza, when he saw the bill, he didn't even want to. It's like, keep it brief. So you did great work on it, though. So we will we will look at this question of bringing in other groups. We'll hear from some of, and maybe the best person to bring in would be Sue Siglowski on this, for her to weigh in. We are running out of time a little bit, kind of, so we'll hopefully, if this is priority for Senator Bulicks, we'll do our best to move it. But sounds like it might be a little bit more complicated than we thought.
okay.
Tiny bit.
Yeah.
But, okay, thank you. 165, universal school meals. This is a bill that I spoke with the chair of agriculture this morning. This we'll hear from the sponsor today. This bill, I am hoping to move next week, because this will go to, of course, to appropriations and finance, but around the issue of the sort of big picture pieces, our pieces, I think we'll be done with next week. And we do have a young witness sitting behind Ledge Council. We have Katie Baker.
Baker Rouse.
Sorry?
Katie Baker Rouse.
Katie Baker Rouse, and she needn't come up quite yet. We're going to hear a little bit about the bill, and then we'll hear from you, okay? Great, okay, Ms. St. James.
Thank you again, Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel. You all should have H-165 as passed by the House in front of you. The section 1 begins with findings. These findings remain unchanged from Act 151 from last year, which is the pilot program of universal meals that's currently operating right now. Do you want me to walk through the findings or jump to the meat of the bill? Okay. Page 2, section 2 begins on line 19, but only by way of title. So section 2 makes amendments to the school food programs subchapter in title 16. And the first amendment it makes is to the definition section. So if you want to move over to page 3, you'll see on line 11, there's an addition of a definition for approved independent schools just for the subchapter. And that is just to specify that for the purpose of the school food programs, we're only talking about independent schools physically located in Vermont. You all are experts now in independent schools. You know that right now, approved independent schools can be located really anywhere. But for the purposes of the universal meal supplement, which is the next term we're going to go through, an approved independent school has to be physically located in Vermont. Line 14 on page 3, subdivision 5, is the definition of universal meal supplement. Rather than repeat all of this language throughout the bill, we're just defining what is the universal meal supplement. So that means the reimbursement amount paid by the state for the cost of a paid breakfast or lunch under the federal school breakfast and federal school lunch programs. And so subdivision A there on line 17, page 3 for breakfast, the universal meal supplement is a sum equal to the federal reimbursement rate for free school breakfast, less the federal reimbursement rate for a paid school breakfast, using rates identified annually by AOE from payment levels established annually by USDA. And it's the same definition on the next page for lunch, just substituting the term lunch for breakfast. Any questions before we move on? On page 4, line 6, there's a proposed amendment to section 1262A, which is the award of grants section. This section, all the current law talks is all the language about some of the money that the state gives to school food programs, whether that's to start up a program, expand a program, or for the reduced price meals. The state currently pays the price of those, the student portion of a reduced price meal out of the general fund. All of that language is in this section 1262A. And so the language we're adding subdivision E here on line 8 that says universal meal supplements shall be awarded in accordance with section 4017 of this title. We'll walk through 4017 in a couple pages. That's adding a brand new section to chapter 133 in title 16, which is the school funding chapter. And that actually has some significance to it and where the language exists. So we'll walk through that when we get there. And then section, I'm on line 11 now, section 1264, the food program, you'll see current law right there on subsection A. Is each school board or each public school shall cause to operate in a school food program under the National Lunch Act and the Child Nutrition Act, so breakfast and lunch. What subdivision B does is require public schools, for the sake of time, I'm just going to kind of summarize, if that's okay.
Please.
Subsection B requires public schools to operate a federal meals program and offer free meals to every student every day. But that's the first sentence. If we move on to page 5, starting on the very end of line 1, moving on to page 2, for independent schools, this language says an approved independent school operating a school lunch and school breakfast program under the federal meals program shall also offer to each attending student every school day at no charge those meals, only if it wants to qualify for the universal meal supplement. So public schools have to offer this program and offer free meals to everyone, but approved independent schools may offer free meals to everyone under the federal meals programs, and they only have to do that if they want to qualify for the universal meals supplement.
Okay, Senator Sheep, but do you have any thought, if you're able to share, as to why that differentiation between public and private for this program?
So not every independent school is running a school foods program. And for this purpose, you'll see later on, private schools are only being reimbursed for publicly tuition students. So what this language is saying is, if you want to be reimbursed for your publicly tuition students, you have to offer free meals to everyone under these federal programs. You could require private schools to offer free meals to everyone. That would be a large change, and the rest of the bill we would need to talk about what that does to the rest of the bill. But basically, the way Universal Meals operates under Act 151, which is the pilot program that's going on right now, that passed last year, is that all public school students, free meals. Schools have to run them. Private schools do not, independent schools do not, but if they want to take part in this reimbursement program, what we're now calling the Universal Meal Supplement, they do have to run this program. programs.
And that's the same as what we did in the pilot program.
Yes, there's additional language here that I think you'll hear from AOE is added to help flush out operations and to give AOE clearer policy directives on how that's actually carried out in the field. But yes, under Act 151, the only students receiving this universal meal supplement in approved independent schools are publicly tuitioned students.
Sorry.
Thank you. Can you speak to why independent schools don't have to offer a lunch program or food program, food service? You can say no to that. I would love to have an answer at some point.
Well, so under under current law, although it was paused in Act 151, there is an exemption for public schools. So public schools could actually say we're not going to run a federal program, but independent schools are not required to run it under either Act 151, H 165, or current law. That would be a policy. They are allowed to, under the federal meals programs rules, both approved independent and recognized schools are allowed to run those programs.
Whether they receive public funding or not.
Correct. I don't know on that piece.
Okay.
There might be additional federal requirements, but my understanding is that approved independent schools and recognized schools can operate a federal meals program, but I think that would be a policy choice for whether or not you were going to require those schools to do that.
Okay, well, I just
Please go ahead.
want to point, that's just another inequity that had never been articulated before between independent schools and public schools. Just a comment.
That the independent school kids might not be getting lunch.
Well, that they're not required to provide a school program.
They might have to be bringing their.
So it's
Yeah,
again, it's
yeah.
just a difference that I've never heard before.
And I will just clarify that what we're talking about here is under the federal meals program,
Right.
not necessarily other food options. So subdivision C here on line 7, this is language that says schools have to seek to achieve, they shall seek to achieve the highest level of student participation in opting in for breakfast or lunch through these programs. And then the rest of page 5 are ways in which they could seek to achieve the highest participation, but these are not, these are may on lines 10 through 15. Lines 16 through 18 is a school district in an approved independent school shall count time spent by students consuming school meals during class as instructional time. So subdivision C is saying you have to seek to achieve highest level of student participation. Here are some ideas for how you can do that. And subdivision D says you have to count time eating as instructional time.
And this is all new language from the House, right? This is everything. Okay.
Most
I'm just
of,
going back to Senator Bulick's point. That is new language, the independent school piece that Senate House Ags put in.
it's new language if you're looking at the green books now.
Yeah.
Most of this language is that we've walked through thus far is
Yeah.
very similar to what is in Act 151
Okay.
for the pilot program right now. There might be some language, the language might have been updated a little bit, but
Yeah,
the
we can hear from
concept,
House Ed why they put this in, or if they were the ones who did it. Okay.
House Ag,
The House Ed
Yeah.
also saw the bill,
they never have possession of it.
but they saw the bill and had to walk through, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm. But this language that we just walked through, subdivision C and D, is right from Act 151.
Okay.
Line 1, page 6. This is a repeal of the exemption. So currently public schools are required to have run a federal meals program. But there is a process for them to request an exemption from that requirement. Act 151 suspended this option for this current school year. And H-165 proposes to just repeal it altogether, since you're now requiring school districts to participate in the federal meals program. Section 3 on page 7 is what is the universal meal supplement? How is it calculated? And so that's what this does. And so this is adding section 3 is adding section 4017 to chapter 133 in title 16, which is your state funding of public schools. And what this does, to pick up on what Mike was talking about of that nuclear option, that automatic repeal, if you use money from the education fund for something other than is specifically enumerated, there's that nuclear option. And so by putting this language that we're about to walk through in chapter 133, it makes it an automatic acceptable use of the education fund. There's a provision in a specific statute in title or in this chapter that says that basically other programs in this chapter are acceptable uses of the education fund. So it would be treated like transportation reimbursement and some of the other categorical aid categories. So it starts on line 11 with a reference back to the universal meal supplement definition that we walked through that's in the school food program subchapter. And then it takes it public school and then approved independent school. Some of it's the same, but there are a little bit of different provisions for approved independent schools. So for public schools, I'm on line 14, from state funds.
Page, sorry,
7.
thank you.
From state funds appropriated to the agency from the education fund for the universal meal supplement, the agency shall provide a universal meal supplement for the cost of each meal actually provided to each student in the district during the previous quarter when meals are offered to students at no charge pursuant to, and then the program language we just walked through. Subdivision 1 requires school districts to draw down the maximum amount of federal funds they can by participating in the community eligibility provision or provision 2 of the federal meals programs. And it allows the Agency of Education, I'm on page 8, line 4, to require a school food authority that is requesting the universal meal supplement to begin a new cycle of the relevant federal provision in group sites in a manner the agency determines will maximize the drawdown of federal funds. So school districts have to maximize federal fund access, and the Agency of Education can require certain things of them in order to do that. Line 8, second breakfast, which is just like it sounds, the second breakfast is something that's allowable under the school food programs. I believe they're called excess breakfasts in the federal regulations. Those are not
Senator
eligible.
Weeks.
Going back one step or two, it says on page 7, around line 16, that they're providing, the supplement is for the cost of each meal. So is the supplement intended to be like a per diem where it's across the board the same for every school, or is it paid for the cost of each meal? So is it per cost or per diem?
Yep, so if you go back to the definition of what the universal meal supplement is on page 3, it's the federal reimbursement rate, which is going to be the same in all schools for a free breakfast, less the federal reimbursement rate for a paid school breakfast. And those rates are going to be the same. The costs of what it actually, your overhead, staffing, et cetera, those will vary by school. But
And who absorbs?
that would be borne by the school district.
That's it.
The universal meal supplement itself is just that, the federal reimbursement rate for free school breakfast, less the federal reimbursement rate for paid school
Gotcha.
breakfast.
Thank you.
So second breakfast do not count, they do not qualify for reimbursement. Pre-K, line 10. If a public school is running a pre-kindergarten program, they're automatically included in the count of public school students. This addresses private pre-kindergarten programs in a daycare center. So a nonprofit pre-qualified private pre-kindergarten provider that is qualified pursuant to the pre-kindergarten section and is not also an approved or recognized independent school. So we're talking about standalone pre-kindergarten programs. Usually you find those in what you think of as a childcare facility. They are also eligible for the universal meal supplement under this subsection if they operate a food program under a public school food authority.
Senator Hushain?
Public school food authority,
Yes,
the school, okay.
a public
I get
school,
it.
it's a public school
School
food
food
authority.
Thank
It's the umbrella, it's usually a supervisory union, it's the umbrella under which all of the school food programs are kind of managed, that's where the money is going to.
Okay.
So, public school food authorities have the option under these federal programs to take on some of these private programs and provide meals for them. And so what this language does is it says if you are a nonprofit and you are a pre-qualified pre-K provider under the pre-K, the universal pre-K statute, which is section 829, and you're not also in an approved independent school, because we're going to deal with you separately, and you are part of a public school food authority, then you could qualify for the universal meal supplement here. So that's public schools.
Senator Dill?
I'm just trying to process that.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Sorry. You can be a private pre-K program under the umbrella of a public.
Your food program could be.
Okay. Gotcha.
And just from my understanding, still we're basically all of this is what we passed in the pilot. And we are going to hear from the House sponsors in a minute, but
Yeah, so Act 151, which is the
Yeah.
what we're referring to
Yeah.
now as the pilot, is a one-year program in session law. Said public schools, you get the universal meal supplement, and approved independent schools, publicly tuitioned children, you get the universal meal supplement. Done. And when the agency went to actually implement that, they discovered there were categories of schools or children that weren't necessarily specifically accounted for, including pre-K.
okay.
Because I remember our pre-K program is a mixed delivery service. So there are pre-kindergarten children in our public schools, and there are pre-kindergarten children in using public funds in private pre-K programs.
Right.
And then there were some, how do you count independent schools? We're about to get into that. How do you count independent schools if they're also under a public school food authority? So there wasn't as much specificity. And so what AOE did is they brought forward at the beginning of this session some of the challenges they ran into and asked for policy direction. Here's the challenges they have, here's what they are suggesting, and then allowed the House Agriculture to make policy decisions.
We'll have the agencies in today at 4 o'clock, so we'll get from them.
So for approved independent schools, it's the same language here. So if you're running a school foods program and you're offering free meals to all students at no charge, you qualify for the universal meal supplement. I'm on page 9 now. If the approved, here's some language that's specific to approved independent schools. So if the approved independent school participates in the food programs as a site under a public school food authority, so similar to those private pre-K programs and daycare providers, independent schools can run their own food programs under their own school food authority. Or they can partner with public school food authorities. And so if you're a private school that's running a federal meals program and you have partnered with a public school food authority, one of the policy questions AOE asked to be answered is, how do we count those? Are those public students or are those independent school students? Because the program is a public school food authority. And so what this language says is, the independent school is only going to be reimbursed for students attending the approved independent school on public tuition.
That sounds logical
And that
to
was,
me in terms of counting.
and that was the language from 151, what just said, you're going to be reimbursed only for students on on public tuition. But I think what you'll hear from the field is it's not as simple as that when the private school is partnered with a public school food authority as far as how to count those students.
Okay, Senator Julie?
I'm a hands-on visual learner, so we have a lot of expertise in this room. Could you give me an example? I'm looking at my friend here.
So for the record, your name
Doug Davis,
with,
I'm here with Hunger Free Vermont, but I am the former food service director in Burlington. So we used to provide, I assume they still provide meals to Trinity Childcare. For example, Sarah Holbrook. So those meals would come out of the Burlington School Food Authority. And I think that that's what is being explained.
Thank you, Doug. That's really helpful, actually.
thank you.
You're welcome.
The other piece here on line 5, subdivision B, is how do you actually count the number of students that are publicly tuitioned? And so this language is language based on testimony that AOE gave on what they were doing under Act 151. So if the approved independent school participates in the community eligibility provision or is in a year other than the base year of provision 2, the school shall provide the agency with the number of students attending the school on public tuition and the total number of students enrolled in the school. Then the agency will calculate the percentage of students attending the school on public tuition, multiply that number by the paid student percentage, and that will be the number of school meals reimbursed. Similarly to public schools, second breakfasts are not eligible for reimbursement. There's a similar provision on line 16, subdivision 3 for pre-K and approved independent schools. So approved independent schools can run pre-K programs. And if there are publicly tuitioned students under our universal pre-K program attending those pre-K programs, and that school is operating a school feeding program, publicly tuitioned pre-K kiddos are eligible for the reimbursement as well.
Can you say something, and it came up in agriculture, we had to walk through this as well, the extra breakfast. So that's not,
It's not like second meal Taco Bell, right? That's not what
I
we're
don't know
talking
what
about.
that means.
Okay, well, someone here knows what I'm talking about. So this is if there's excess food after the first round of
Okay.
breakfast. If students are getting a second meal, if they are being charged for that meal, that's not going to be reimbursed under this.
Okay.
This is not meant to say that if you have breakfast at home, you can't have breakfast at school.
Okay. We did hear a little testimony this morning that there might be kids who didn't get dinner, so they might come in extra hungry. Does it allow them to get 2 breakfasts?
It's certainly,
That's
there's
fine.
nothing in here that prohibits
Okay.
student, it's just the reimbursement. What is the state paying for?
Okay, thank you.
And
Sarah
then,
Hashim.
While we're on that topic, food at the end of the day that isn't eaten, where does it go?
that would be a great question for the agency or the field. I don't know the answer to that.
I can just say anecdotally, we'll have testimony. We did hear in ag last year and in ed last year. A lot of folks will bag that up for kids, put it in their backpacks and send it home.
Yeah, it would be great to know if it goes home with kids or if it's not gonna go home to them, if it goes to homeless shelters or somewhere that it will get eaten.
The St. James.
Let's see. So subdivision 4 is saying, again, an approved independent school is only eligible for the supplement if it's making meals available to all students for free every school day. So not just the publicly tuitioned students. The state is going to reimburse for the publicly tuitioned students, but the school is required to provide free meals to every student attending. And then the same language on page 10, subdivision 5, about maximizing the drawdown of federal funds. And then line 14, subdivision D. This language, in my opinion, is not legally necessary. It's essentially just a repeat of the universal meals supplement definition. But I think there was some thought that it would just be more user-friendly to have this language here rather than requiring someone to flip back to a separate section in Title 16. So that's all subdivision D is, just essentially restating what the universal meal supplement is. That's it for universal meals. The second to last section of the bill is the local food incentive grant program. Any questions before I go on?
Question, but, yeah.
Could we maybe ask? our
Well, we're gonna hear
judges
from
to
witnesses.
answer?
Can we just finish going through the
Oh,
bill
that's-
itself for now?
I was gonna maybe answer Senator.
Well, we're gonna hear from others. So
Oh, okay.
I just would love to get through
Gotcha.
the bill so she can get going and then we can hear from witnesses.
So the section 4 is an amendment to the local foods incentive grant program. So the local foods incentive grant program lives in Title 16 in that school foods program subchapter. It is a relatively new program. I believe it was created in 2021. And it provides grants to current law, public schools, if a certain percentage of their foods for their school food programs comes from locally sourced foods. What locally sourced foods means is addressed in this section. All this does is allow approved independent schools that are eligible to receive the universal meal supplement to also participate in this locally produced foods grant program. So you'll see right on page 11 there, line 7, this is just an illustration of the amendment here. You'll see on line 7, supervisory union and supervisory districts are crossed out there. And you'll see everywhere there was a reference to a school board or an SU, you'll see the term eligible entity. And if you go all the way to the end, page 16, you'll see there's a brand new definition added here on line 9, subsection E. So it's used in this section, eligible entity means a supervisory union or supervisory district, so all your public schools. And, or an approved independent school operating a food program as defined by subdivision 1261A1 of this title that also qualifies for the universal meal supplement pursuant to section 4017 of this title. So rather than throughout this whole section keep saying supervisory union, supervisory district, and approved independent school, we've just pushed them all together into one term that is eligible entity. So the only amendment to this is allowing approved independent schools that receive the supplemental or the universal meal supplement to also participate in this program if they want to.
Senator Sheen.
Locally sourced food. I have a town in my district, Bellows Falls. There's a farm within 5 miles of that school, but it's in New Hampshire, so they're not able to use that. Would we encounter any problems if we wanted to create a sort of, you can use locally sourced food if it's within 10, 15 miles of the Vermont border, or maybe 5 miles?
That is a policy decision. The what locally sourced means has kind of 2 different meanings throughout this, and I think time-wise,
Tight on time.
just reading the room, that might be a conversation for a different day.
Understood.
But it's a policy decision on what local means for this program.
It's a great question. We do have to figure it out a little bit because I think what you're saying makes really good sense. Is it local, you gotta drive to Bennington?
Yeah.
Or is it local, you can just go right over the border?
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, where is the definition of locally produced foods? I don't
So
know.
there's kind of 2 phases. The first one is school districts or the schools themselves, the
Can you
entities.
just give me the page?
Let's see, page 11, line 10. So for the first phase of eligibility, the schools get to define what local means to them. And then for the second, then that's just for the first year.
Yeah.
To kind of kickstart.
Yeah.
And then for the second phase of the program, if you've completed phase 1, you are eligible for phase 2. There is on page 13, line 12. Using the definition in Title 9, Section 2465AE. And that's the definition on page 13, line 12. And that is in the commerce title. And that talks about local to Vermont.
we ask Hayden to extract that and distribute?
That section.
Just as, just whatever.
Yeah, we'll have Ms. St. James do it. Yeah, if you don't mind just sending it. along,
Absolutely.
That'd be great. Give you a free comment.
So
That's the bill.
pure policy on
Yeah.
what local means for this program, and then it would have an effective date of July 1, 2023.
Any immediate questions for Ms. St. James at this point before we hear from the sponsor of the bill, who hopefully can help us answer some things? Am I sticking around a little
I
bit?
can stay until 3.
Okay, great, perfect. So Representative Cole. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely, thank you for having me.
Welcome to send an invitation. We just had, as you heard, a pretty thorough walkthrough of the bill, but there are a lot of questions. So
Absolutely.
maybe what the best way to start would just give us your overview of what, sort of the problem you were all trying to solve, some of a little bit of your debate and discussion, anything you think we should know about it. And then we had a range of questions around what's local. Did you take any testimony on whether or not students take food home, all those kinds of things. So with that, the floor is yours.
Sure. For the record, I'm Esme Cole, and I serve on the Committee on Agriculture, Food Resiliency, and Forestry upstairs. And we spent a lot of time working with H165. It was great having the bill in our committee because we were able to add our emphasis on food resiliency and the full cycle of food from seed to plate, and incorporating that local piece in the end there with the local food grant program that we have. I have a statement here which I can go through, but I'm also happy to stop along the way to answer questions, perhaps some of the ones that came up, and maybe some will be answered in my statement here. So H165 fell under my committee's jurisdiction in large part due to our new mandate to address food resiliency in the state, which includes food access. This bill's implications on Vermont farmers are profound through expanded opportunities to strengthen institutional purchasing relationships with schools. The universal aspect of this program, including students from all economic backgrounds, creates the scale necessary for farmers to conduct reasonable business at a profitable volume while lowering the cost per plate for the school. The permanence aspect guarantees predictable timelines for farmers and opportunities for long-lasting, mutually advantageous relationships. Schools spend over $15 million on food every year, and with the passage of H165, more dollars will continue to end up in the hands of Vermont farmers. For every $1 spent on local foods in schools, at least $1.60 re-enters the Vermont economy. By regularly offering these foods to our students, we open the door to lifelong relationships with local products and an improved understanding of Vermont's food systems. To paint a picture of how this policy looks in schools, I'll quote the Director of Child Nutrition from the Essex Westford School District. He says, "Over the past 2.5 years, I have seen my program turned on its head for the better. More kids are eating, and we are scratch cooking with whole local foods. Prior to universal school meals, the cafeteria was literally a ghost town. Fast forward to today, and you can see the room is bursting with beaming kids sharing a meal together. This is a prime example of what supporting students' social and emotional well-being looks like. It's why it doesn't work when it's only for those in need. It's about providing nourishment with dignity." Vermont spends a significant portion of our state budget on a robust and nationally acclaimed K-12 education system, thanks to y'all. And I cannot think of a more worthy investment than our children. Yet for the many dollars we spend on a wide range of programming, there exists a portion of students who are unable to take full advantage of these investments because of unmet basic needs. To get the full return on Vermont's investments in education, we need a guarantee that all of Vermont's students are food secure. And the only way to ensure that students have equal access to meals at schools is by making them universal. According to data from the Department of Vermont Health Access and the US Census, there are at least 25,000 school-aged children in Vermont who are not eligible for free or reduced price meals, but whose families cannot meet their basic needs and are therefore highly likely to experience food insecurity. That is 42% of all Vermont school children, and in total, 75% of all school-age children are at risk of food insecurity. At a time of high food costs and the ending of emergency allotments for Three Squares Vermont, it is imperative we continue universal school meals for our children. 40% of Vermonters reported experiencing food insecurity in the last 12 months, many whose incomes fall above the 185% federal poverty line. Vermont families with children were 5 times more likely to report food insecurity. There's an enormous administrative burden and costs on both school districts and the Agency of Education in separating students based on financial status. Having myself been the school administrator responsible for chasing meal reimbursements, I can attest to this reality. I spent many hours tracking the eating and attendance habits of lower income students in a process which not only felt discriminatory, but also impractical. My salary came from the same dollars the school hoped to be reimbursed for, while I otherwise could have been supporting a short-staffed classroom or the kitchen coordinator and preparing meals. Yet perhaps the most direct financial consequence of universal school meals is how it provides us access to millions more in federal funding. In order to participate in the provisions that maximize reimbursement under the National School Lunch Program, schools are obligated to offer meals at no charge to all students. These federal funds support nutrition at school for all students, regardless of financial status, and expand possibilities for local purchasing. 2 exciting improvements to these federal provisions are set to begin in July 2023. And I just learned today, very exciting news, that the USDA has lowered the percentage threshold that schools must meet to qualify for the maximum federal reimbursement rate.
So that should save the state some real money.
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And we have calculations on exactly
Yeah,
how
we'll get them as
many
well.
more schools, will qualify. In addition, a new Medicaid direct certification will contribute further. Due to the Medicaid change alone, the Agency of Education estimates that 56% more Vermont schools will be eligible for maximum reimbursements. This unprecedented opportunity makes the case even stronger for our state to take advantage now. 4 states have already passed permanent universal school meals, and 25 other legislatures are actively considering doing the same. We should be proud that H165 is becoming a model for the nation. Other states have specifically referred to Vermont in developing their own laws, particularly in the way our bill maximizes the drawdown of federal funds. Hunger is a policy choice. Universal school meals is an actionable, practical strategy to address it. In addition to the ripple effects of long-term benefits it provides our students, farmers, and the economy. Happy to field any questions on the issue.
So when you were working as an administrator, Senator Hashim's question, would you ever pack up lunches or pack up backpacks for kids to go home for evening meals, or was the food, extra food just tossed?
So the system I worked under was different. It was before the federal implementation of universal school meals. So not all students were being served in the same way. And usually the meals we would prepare were in direct relation to the amount of students that were there. So there was very little food waste.
In testimony, did you hear about any schools that did this?
In terms of, no, I think we need to follow up a little bit more about that. But I have heard a bit about the relationship between food waste in general and universal school meals, and how investing in universal school meals indirectly is an investment in the quality of meals. And so that in turn can help to reduce the amount of food waste, especially if we're purchasing higher quality foods that are more nutritious for the students.
Anything else from Representative Cole? Yeah, please, Senator Weeks.
Were there any schools that you found during your research development of the bill that didn't have any food preparation capabilities? Kids brought them in and just weren't prepared for this obligation? Just curious.
That's a great question. I think, and I would love to get more direct testimony on that issue. Maybe that would be a good idea to follow up. But But of course, in offering universal school meals, that doesn't mean that every student is going to participate and ask for lunch. And I think as time goes on, we'll get a better sense of the numbers of participation. And we know they'll be greater than what we're at now, which is wonderful. We want more student participation in both breakfast and lunch. But in terms of capacity, I mean, one of the benefits of this is that instead of working on the administrative side of things, you know, those same staff people can be transitioned into the actual preparation of food. And we actually did hear testimony from several schools that that was something that occurred. They were no longer needed in their administrative capacity, spending those hours, and were able to.
The question's a little different. I'm just wondering if that cost is maybe just a little bit higher, just because we have to build out some school food preparation functions, which don't currently exist. That's all. It's not, I'm not poking fingers at what people are doing. I'm just seeing if there's like another order, another effect that we're not considering.
Yeah,
But we can ask.
We can find out.
I
Thank
think that
you,
might be a good idea. Yeah.
Can I ask a-
Yeah, please,
Are we-
please,
are we
yeah.
hard on time?
We are a little hard on time, but keep going. If you have, this is our one opportunity to
Yeah, okay,
represent school,
good.
because we will have
Okay.
more testimony.
Stigma reduction, was that an approach that you guys dealt with before coming to this conclusion?
Well, it's a huge part of this bill in general. I think in our committee, we did try to stick to maybe more the like food and local piece, and then the financial piece of why this is a cost savings in the long run. But in terms of stigma, there are so many studies out there. I think it's 1 in 3 families who are eligible for free or reduced lunch don't even apply because of stigma, in part on both the child and on the parent team, even just submitting the form. And some of those families don't even know that they're eligible, but they are. So it's just a huge waste of like federal resources that could be drawn down to serve those families. So that's sort of one quantifiable way to think about stigma. But this bill, I mean, I noticed in my school, the kids who were taking advantage of lunch before universal school meals were the students who basically needed to, or otherwise would be out on meal for the day. So the beauty of this is by investing in meals for everyone, not just the kids who need it. I mean, it's incentive for everyone to go to the lunchroom and you just show up and everyone's eating. And the school is investing in better quality food because it's a larger portion of our students eating. We have more federal funds to fund the actual food that we're purchasing, in addition to the local foods incentive grant. I mean, so everything combined, it's just really making the biggest bang for our buck and incorporating all students so that the stigma problem is no longer.
Was there a fiscal note associated with your bill that you can share?
The JFO did a whole study, but perhaps Julia Richter could speak more to that
I think we have
as
her
well.
on. And just a question, if, so all this is based on the assumption that the federal program continues as is or it gets stronger. What would the obligation to Vermont remain intact if the federal government were to begin to retract its generosity? The way the bill is drafted.
The bill, I mean, perhaps someone else could speak to that, but what I do know is that in our many years of history of the National School Lunch Program, the subsidy for that, for reimbursement has either stayed the same from year to year or increased. And that's been going on for decades. So it would be a total shock, I think, to everyone if those federal supplements were to just drop for whatever reason, but I really.
Unforeseen,
Yeah.
recession, depression, it's just unforeseen.
Or even these new ones that we're benefiting from could
Yeah.
change.
And it's interesting because a lot of the analysis that we've done is based on not having these new provisions that are set to begin in July of 2023. So this is really a beautiful added benefit that's just making it even more, substantial of a program and cheaper for us than it would be without.
I think, so just so we're clear, I mean, we're not getting, even though the feds, and we're going to hear from the agency, Rosie Kruger later, they are making steps that will hopefully allow this to be less costly for Vermonters. We're still by this, as you'll hear from Julia Richter, this is a big state investment for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. One that we did hear earlier on in testimony, roughly when we had Julian earlier, $27.8 million investment.
And luckily with a ripple effect in all sorts of other
Yeah.
sectors too.
Anything for Representative Cole before we let her get back to committee or the floor?
Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Baker Rouse, we have a young witness at the request of Senators Hardy and Gray, who is in the building today and would like to say something about universal school meals. So please, the floor is yours.
For the record, my name is Katie Baker Rouse. I am 11 years old and go to Mary Hogan Elementary School in Middlebury. I wrote the letter below from my International Baccalaureate Primary Years Program exhibition project on hunger. Thank you for letting me come and read it to you today. I am writing to you because I would like you to make universal school meals permanent as written in H-165, an act relating to school food programs and universal school meals. There are many reasons why universal school meals should be permanent. One reason is that kids need the nutrition to learn. Also, for the 33,900 Vermont kids who are food insecure, many or all of their meals are at school, and they rely on these meals. Lastly, the Universal School Meals Program eliminates the stigma of kids having to say they are part of the free or reduced food program. Kids need food to learn. If they don't have the nutrition they need, they won't have the energy to pay attention and won't learn. If kids aren't getting enough healthy food, they will be sick more often and might miss school. Then they will miss out on learning and it's an ongoing cycle. Also, kids who aren't getting enough food might zone out because they are thinking about how hungry they are or thinking about the food they don't have. According to Hunger Free Vermont, universal school meals improve students' grades by up to 10 weeks worth of learning. Universal school meals give kids what they need to learn. According to the Vermont Agency of Education, 34.85% of Vermont kids rely on meals at school. These kids come to school hungry and without breakfast and lunch. Many of these kids are embarrassed to be in the free or reduced lunch line every day. If you make universal school meals permanent, that will happen. Between 2019 and 2022, lunch participation has risen about 10% because of universal school meals. School lunch should be free to all students, no matter their family's income. In the memoir, Free Lunch by Rex Ogle, Rex, the main character, is really embarrassed because he is part of the free or reduced lunch program, and all the other kids pay quickly and leave. But Rex has to shout at the cashier because she is hard of hearing. All the other kids hear and tell him to hurry up, and then he's even more embarrassed. I feel like that shouldn't have to happen to other kids. Universal school meals are really helpful to many kids who are from low-income families and are on the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, also known as 3 Squares VT. The extra money from the pandemic ended March 31st, so it's even more important that universal school meals are permanent. This SNAP challenge is where you get $4.20 a day per person for food. I am doing the challenge for a week. My family had $147 for food. This challenge was created so other people would know how it feels to live off of SNAP. It was very stressful because I didn't know if I was going to run out of food. On the second day of the project, there was only half a gallon of milk left and only half of our bread left. I was hungry a lot. I learned it can be really hard to pay attention in class if your stomach is hurting. Also, many healthier foods are more expensive, so people who are low income can't buy things like salads. Universal school meals were very helpful. Without these, my family and I wouldn't have had enough food to eat. School breakfast and lunch meant we could afford healthier food. To recap, kids need nutritious meals to pay attention and focus. Many children rely on universal school meals as their main food source. Finally, universal school meals eliminate stigma for low-income kids. I hope you will make universal school meals.
Thank you very much, Ms. Baker Rouse. That was a well-written letter, and I think hit a lot of the very, very important points. And I admire that you and your family decided to take the SNAP challenge, which sounds like you learned a lot from it. And I learned a lot from just hearing the experiences you've had. Any questions for Ms. Baker Rouse, the future senator from Madison County?
Well done.
Good job.
Very well done. Yeah, thank you for coming in. Yeah, great job. We hope you remember this experience. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.